Hello. Welcome to Author in You, a group coaching teleseminar designed to help you learn the basics of the publishing industry and take you to the level where you finish that first draft and you're ready to find out what you need to do to become a published author. I wanted to talk specifically tonight about what writers today can do to get through that confusing maze that we now know as the publishing industry. I think there used to be the tried and true method of sending in your letters and waiting for a certain number of rejections, but now things are certainly much different. And so I wanted to just ask you initially, what do you advise new authors today when you're coaching them or you're advising someone that you met at a conference about how they can get started and sustain a career?
Well, that's a fantastic question, Stephanie. And the problem with the whole situation is I can't answer it because every single person is different, and I would have to be very specifically answering about a specific person. If you were a man, for example, it would be a completely different answer than if you were a woman. If you were a minority, that would be a completely different answer. In fact, that's why I started the strategic coaching sessions, because they're all about you, whoever you are, like finding out what your background is, what your goals are, what your vision is. And everybody, on their own needs to go through that process. Exactly what is your vision, what is your goal, and then you have to learn as much as you can about the marketplace. I wrote a book, in fact, I think it was my last book, called How to Publish Your Novel. And it gives all the information about the kinds of novels and who takes them, and small publishers versus large publishers, and representation, protection, all that stuff. And unfortunately, there's no really simple way to answer that question. So maybe you could ask me, different questions that I could answer.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you giving that answer, because that's certainly something that I've shared with the students before. As I'm sure you're approached often, and as a published author myself, I got a phone call yesterday from someone who said, I want to get published, tell me what to do. And I answered that question in the same way you just did. It really just depends on that person, because each person has to build their own author brand or author platform. I know you were interviewed fairly recently by a mutual friend of ours, Jeff Rivera, and in that article you talked about how authors need to start thinking about having a brand or having a platform. So this maybe is a good segue into what you were just mentioning, how it really is, unique to each author. How important is it for an author to understand what his or her platform is or what his or her brand is?
Well, there couldn't be anything more important, unfortunately or fortunately. It's just the reality. You need to have a platform. And if you don't have a platform, first of all, you need to know what a platform is. And a platform is a marketing network through which you can sell copies of your books. I don't mean necessarily selling them physically yourself, but a platform you can introduce, a marketing network you can introduce to your publisher, so the publisher has a feeling that there is a market for your book. So, for example, if you're writing a book that's related to a children's book about music, and you know that there are 10,000 music teachers like yourself, you want to be able to introduce your book to that network, because 10,000 music teachers times 10 clients each, now you're at, a very significant, large number to start the ball rolling. And that's the kind of things that, make up your platform. So if you don't have a platform yet, then my advice to you is get a platform before you go out and market your book, because for better or worse, publishers in New York, at least, simply don't have time today, don't have the resources to take on writers who don't have a marketing network behind them. It's a very sad situation if you compare it to the way things were 20 years ago, but it's just reality.
Right. I agree. And so, what do you say? What do you say to the aspiring novelist or the fiction writer who says, "Okay, as a nonfiction writer, one of my students is an executive coach, so she certainly has a clear audience. She's got a strong platform. But what about the clients who are writing fiction and they're writing a particular novel with certain characters? How do they then think about building a platform?"
Well, fiction is much tougher than nonfiction. If you're, let's say, if you're a novelist who's writing romance novels, all you have to do to make sure that you have a platform is to write a romance novel that truly falls within the particular category of romance that you're writing in, and take it to the right publishers who do that kind of book. those publishers have made sure that there is a platform for that book. It's even better, however, if you get to know that platform even before you go to the publisher, and you can do that by attending conferences about, romance conferences, subscribing to newsletters and magazines in that area, getting to know some people, and maybe getting endorsements for your book from some of the top romance writers. And those are all the kind of common sense things that you need to think about doing to get your book to stand out from the pack of books being submitted.
Right. Now, of course, we're talking about the publishers. Would you say that this is also that authors need to look at when they're considering approaching an agent as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just as difficult. I mean, it's as difficult to get an agent as it is to get a publisher. And you need to do the same thing. Show that you're an entrepreneur. Show that you're aggressive about selling your books. Show that you thought about it by getting endorsements and by having suggestions in your cover letter. Your cover letter's third big point should be your ability to market the book, and that's going to get the agent's attention just as much as the concept of the book and your background.
Right. So what I hear you saying is, I think 20 years ago, if you loved to write and you wanted to write a great book, you spent all that time working on the craft, making sure that the book was a solid vehicle. Of course, you still want to do that. But also what I hear you saying is that authors need to see themselves as business-minded entrepreneurs. And you even have a term on your blog called authorpreneur. Can you talk a little bit about the need for authors to wear both hats these days?
Well, that's exactly what it is, Stephanie. It's you have to wear both hats. And in one of my books, I talk about you need an iron curtain between your marketing brain and your creative brain, so you never let your creative brain get disturbed by, rejections or anything that happens on the marketing side of your brain. You really have to have that strength. And if you say, well, I'm just a person who likes to write and I don't want to deal with the business of it all, I don't know how to do that, well, that's not going to get, you're not going to get very far in today's world by having that attitude. So I would say snap out of it, get a new attitude, decide you're going to learn the business that you want to be in. It's always struck me as odd that people want to profit like crazy from the intellectual property business, but they don't want to learn anything about the business. They want somebody else to do that. That just doesn't work as a game plan in today's world. The educated client who's studied the business through the Internet, which is available for free, or through the many books written about the business, is going to be the client that stands out, assuming that their work is also great. They're going to have an edge, like a huge edge, over anybody who doesn't know the business.
Right. And let's talk a little bit more about your background, because as I mentioned in your bio, you started out as a professor of literature, and I don't know if morphed is the right word, or I guess maybe strategically you've crafted a new career where you're everything from a writing coach to a branding consultant to what you can call yourself as a literary manager. So maybe talk a little bit about how you were able to sort of craft your own career, and I think that could maybe serve as a guide for the aspiring authors on the phone to understand it's not just about writing that book, but it's really about looking at that career management piece.
Well, that's a good point, and I think what I did when I was starting a new career is I realized that my number one capital that I possessed was my time, and not a lot of money, and that I needed to figure out how to use my time as my most precious resource. And I got organized. In one of my books, I talk about how to escape lifetime security and pursue your impossible dream, which is a guide to career change. And I talk about how you need to figure out to spend so many hours a week on the marketing of your work, so many hours on the actual creation of the work, and then, of course, your other hours, you have to earn a living until your work earns a living for you. But it begins with time management and making sure that you're putting your time in the right place and, of course, your energy in the right place, that you stop associating with people who tell you that you can't do this or why should you do it, and you start associating with positive people who tell you to go for it. And then you need to, as I said, learn the business. What's the end point of the sales of a book? It's a contract. Read contracts. You can find them on the Internet, and you need to read them and ask make sure you understand all the terms and all the contracts. There are just many things you need to do. So you need to, in other words, do your homework. This is a very serious business in which over 50 authors are making over $5 to $10 million a year in this country alone, and not counting screenwriters, just novelists. And many of them, not many of them, but I would say 15 or 20 of them are making over $30 million a year. It's a very serious business, and if you were going into the real estate business, I don't think you would think about going into it without going to real estate school and learning the business. And you certainly wouldn't go into the legal business without studying the law. So I like to see people take the same amount of seriousness when they go into the literary business and really learn how the business works.
Those are all great points, and I'm glad you mentioned those sort of high-earning, best-selling authors. What about the mid-list authors, the ones who are there in the middle? Of course, that's probably the bulk of authors. So what do you say to writers who say, okay, I want to be one of the $1 million earners, and how do I get there versus, sort of staying at that mid-list level? Is that where your coaching comes in, or how do they learn how to do that?
Well, that is where my coaching comes in. I mean, I coach people at all levels, the ones who haven't done anything yet or just starting, and I hope I can save them 10 years of learning curve by coaching them. But also I do mid-career authors who are tired of being mid-list authors and want to see if they can break out. And then authors even farther along who want to be in the movie business and have never had a book sold to the movies yet. But when it comes to mid-career authors, they probably have an even tougher time than the people who are trying to break in because they get pigeonholed. Mm-hmm. And a typical strategy for a mid-career author is to change his or her name or come up with a new pseudonym and go out with a different kind of book and make sure it has a high concept behind it before they even start writing it, so it stands out immediately. And that's maybe where we would start with a mid-list author. Again, it all depends on the author and how old they are and what their background has been and what their book scan reads and what kind of reviews they've had. Everybody's completely different, so I can't really generalize too much further. But I think you get the gist of what I'm talking about.
Right. So, again, it is tailored to that particular author, but there are strategies that, definitely can be put into place to help an author go where he or she would like to go.
Right, exactly.
Great. What would you say the most common mistake a potential client makes when soliciting an agent or a publishing house or even yourself to represent them?
Not respecting the person's time and not doing research on who they're sending it to from the beginning.
Right.
And I think that happens all the time. I probably get 50, 60 queries a day that make it through to me, and we get many more at the office. But a lot of them are just completely inappropriate, and they're from people who didn't bother, looking up anything about what kind of books I like or, what we do. Somebody sending us textbooks, for example, or children's picture books, just because they put us, we're on a spam list of everybody who represents books. And that's a huge mistake because it starts out on the worst possible foot, and we normally just delete emails like that without even responding to them. One thing is to, again, do your homework, do your research, know who you're submitting it to, and respect that person because that person, you're trying to elect that person to be your gatekeeper. So you need to really treat that person correctly because the minute you get on their life is too short list, you're not going to hear back from them at all.
Right.
And so many writers allow their egos to be to get in their way and display their egos to their representatives or to their editors at the publishing house, and it just makes me cringe every time I see it happen, which is constantly, because they shouldn't be doing that. They should be, if they have to display their egos, they should do it with their therapist, their spouse, with their friends, some bartender. But not to the people who are trying, using their precious time trying to help you.